right, so we're going to do a couple things today. We're going to finish up Class 6 that we started on Tuesday, so the Old Kingdom, and then we will look at, we'll do some review, and also, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about research papers as well. So I got all your submissions. Thank you. Looks good. I am going to give you some notes back on things that, I'm not going to change your topic, but let's say your topic was the pyramids of Giza. I'll be like, all right, so let's look specifically maybe at this. I'll give you some suggestions on maybe look at this, look at this. If your topic is too broad, I might give you some suggestions on how to narrow it. If it's too narrow, I might give you some suggestions on how to broaden it, that type of stuff. Okay?
Sounds good. Broaden it.
Okay. So I'll give you that. If you look on your syllabus, your outline is due in about a month. So your outline, we'll talk more about that later. So on September 22nd, I'll also put it up on the board as well. So your outline is due September 22nd. That is your next phase.
History quiz, is that next Tuesday?
Yep, that's this coming Tuesday. And so that includes today's class.
Okay.
So everything that we're doing up to today. So basically from the beginning up till today. Okay. Yesterday's CSP class didn't record. Forgot to turn the mic on. I know. It's not there. Okay, so let's dive into where we ended. So we were talking about.
Question.
Yep.
You can like that first picture. What are those tower things? No, the other one.
The like the first presentation.
Yeah.
This?
No, the other one.
Yes, that.
The first, like
The first one. This city. Yeah. What are those tower things?
Lights for a soccer field, probably. Is my guess? I don't know. Okay, so we went through the mythology of everything, and then we talked about these symbols. So this is the Ankh, this is the Jed, this is the Was, and then the crook and flail. We're going to be seeing that all throughout, the crook and flail. Like, remember, that's like the little hook, looks like a little crozier, and then the flail. That was this tool that was used for threshing the grain. So you put all the grain in the holes on this kind of big mat, and you kind of wipe it away, and all the holes that are much lighter, right? They're almost like paper. You kind of swish it, and all those holes fly off, and you're left with the heavier grain underneath. Other cultures would take big pans and just kind of swish it up in the air. Those are different ways of doing that. But this was, again, the crook stood for kingship and the flail stood for the fertility of the land. All right, so we're going to dig into our first period. I'm going to go back to this. So we're today looking at the Old Kingdom. So 2600 to 2150 BCE. BC. I don't know why I said BCE. I hate BCE. So it's what modern historians and archaeologists call BC. They don't like calling it before Christ, so they call it before Common Era. BCE means the same thing as BC. You're still using the same year. Whatever. Okay. So the Old Kingdom of Egypt existed from the 3rd through the 6th dynasties. Remember, there's these dynasties, and there are these different kingdoms as well. A kingdom is a broader period of time. A dynasty is a smaller period of time. That just means one family or one group of people ruled for a certain period of time. And there were dynasties before the Old Kingdom, but that was kind of that prehistory that we're looking at.
That's so cool.
So the 3rd through the 6th dynasties. This was stable. There was a period of stability, economic prosperity. This was kind of the first real kingdom. This was the first stable part of the Egyptian culture. This culture or the Old Kingdom is characterized by a few different things, but mainly we're looking at these advancements in what we'll call funerary architecture, meaning architecture having to do with funerals or tombs, right? It's a fancy way of saying tombs, but funerary architecture. There were these great state-sponsored building projects all throughout the Old Kingdom. And by state-sponsored, again, we mean that the state did it. It wasn't individual people. There was really no individual impetus to get this stuff done. It was all about building tombs for the kings. That's it. These tombs were, yeah?
So the periods were just pretty much for the king's tombs.
Yeah, this is the greatest thing we can look at. There were other artworks that were done during this time, and we'll look at those briefly, but when we talk about the Old Kingdom, that's the age of the pyramids. And that's kind of commonly called the age of the pyramids. That's when almost all of these pyramids were built. So we always think of, oh, the pyramids, that was like an Egyptian thing. It was, but it was only in this kind of, not only, but mainly in this period of 2600 to 2150 BC. Okay. So this is this first, do I not have a mastaba in here? Wait a minute. Well, okay. I thought for sure I did. Okay. There's a tomb that's called a mastaba, right? This was the first thing that was built. This was this first piece of funerary architecture. And a mastaba is pretty simple. Imagine this, but just this first layer here. Okay, so just this first layer. It's basically just a big block building. And it goes up 20 feet or so, 10, 15, 20 feet, depending. This was the first step of building these, literally and figuratively, of these pyramids. So before they were building pyramids, they were building what's called a mastaba. So I don't have a picture of it, but you can easily kind of visualize what it looks like. It just looks like that first step. It's just flat on top, just a big flat building. Okay? Shortly after that, though, they started to build what's called step pyramids. This is kind of this transitional thing between a mastaba and what we would call a true pyramid. And it's pretty simple to figure out how they did it, right? You take mastabas and you put them on top of each other, like a wedding cake. Okay? And it makes sense, too. Over time, one pharaoh wants to become more grand than the previous. You always want to advance. You always want to do more. All right, so was this just a big solid block of stone? Was there stuff underneath it? Was there stuff inside of it? Are there passageways? It depends. This is what the inside of a step pyramid would look like. So this is your ground level, where it's cut off here. There would be entryways, and there would be these passages to get down into here. These burial chambers would be below ground, often. Not always, but often they're going to be below ground.
The royals or like for funerals?
This would be for royals. So it would mostly be done for kings, although they would do some smaller ones, some smaller mastabas, maybe the size of this classroom, for lesser people. People who were upper class, so to speak, people who were important in the realm. So the priests, for instance, would have their own mastaba. An advisor to the pharaoh would have a mastaba maybe this size. But no one other than the pharaoh would have these larger ones.
So like, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So like for like the pharaohs and like kings and all the royals, would they like live kind of away from like the hometown of Egypt?
No,
Like the
kind
common
of separated.
there were settlements right nearby. So this was going to be pretty close to where they were living. Again, it depends. We're looking at kind of a broad section of history. Some of the tombs were put far away. Some of them were put a little bit closer. It just depends on where the king was living at the time. But they weren't super far away, because he would want to go and see what was happening. He's going to want to go and tour this construction project. So when you become a pharaoh, you start building your tomb right away. Okay, because you need to have your own.
So one pyramid would have been for like one king.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps his wife. Sometimes, as we get a little bit later, he will do a separate pyramid just for his wife. A smaller one. The interior walls were decorated with scenes of daily life and funerary rituals. We talked about that a little bit last time. Remember, this was the way to ascertain that the pharaoh is going to have a good afterlife. Right? These were not just decoration. These were almost like magic spells or religious figures showing this is how his life is going to be in the afterlife.
How is there like a ladder down there? Like how do they get down there?
Yeah, so there would be ladders, or sometimes there would be other shafts leading to it that would then be blocked. These would be air shafts and also shafts for the spirit, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Shove the coffin down there.
No, you don't just go. But inside this tomb, this is where all the walls would be decorated that we were seeing earlier. Because of the riches included in the graves, they wouldn't just decorate the walls, but they would also put things, right? Chariots, food, mummified animals, the favorite pets of the pharaohs. All the things that a pharaoh would need in the afterlife, basically think of like a storage unit. They're going to put all that stuff in there. So everything that a pharaoh is going to need in the afterlife, which is all the stuff that he needed in this life, they're going to be putting in there as well. So the body's going to be there, the decoration walls, the decoration of the walls, and all of the stuff. This was very precious stuff too. There was lots of gold, there were lots of jewels, there were lots of things in there. So early on, almost every single one of these tombs was robbed. And so as we move towards these step pyramids, they're starting to make it much more difficult for people to get in. So it used to be they would just do this, they would put the pharaoh in, and then they would close it up and walk away. Well, it's easy for people to get in. So then they started putting it underground, and then they would start to, again, there's maybe a passage getting in here, and then they would fill it up with a rock after they put the pharaoh in to make it more difficult. The problem is that the people who were doing the work knew exactly where everything was, and they could be bought off by grave robbers to come in and undo it all. Yeah.
Like any Indiana Jones, like traps and everything.
They didn't do traps. No. They did do curses, though. There were curses. So take that for what you will.
Like no temple falling apart.
No,
Arrows
sorry.
shooting out.
We've never seen that. Sorry. Many other tombs were cut into rock cliffs also in an attempt to thwart grave robbers. Those are going to be more towards the middle period and late period. But yeah, so that was always a concern. And again, a pharaoh didn't want his grave to be robbed. Why? Because then his afterlife is going to suck, because he's not going to have all the things he needs for his afterlife. So as time went on, these pyramids would get more and more complex. Different passageways leading absolutely nowhere to try to mess with grave robbers. They'd just try to make it as difficult as possible. Okay, so this was a step pyramid. The first major king to launch a major pyramid building project was called King Djoser. He ruled in the 3rd dynasty. And this is the step pyramid that we're looking at. This was near the capital city of Memphis, right near Cairo.
That's so cool.
Okay.
He's buried.
He was. His tomb was robbed. He's gone now.
Like they took his body too,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't know where it is.
Mm-mm.
Why would he steal the body?
Because there were the actual coffin, the sarcophagus was decorated with jewels and stuff. So you drag the whole thing out, and then you take it to wherever you're going to take it, and then you just dump the body somewhere in a river or whatever.
So that's tough.
Okay.
How were they not afraid? If they're like true, if they're like really Egyptians, how are they not afraid of doing that?
Don't know.
They're not.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so the pyramids of Giza. These are the only remaining of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. And you can see it's very close to modern-day city of Cairo, which was known as Memphis back then. So there are 3 pyramids here, and then you see 3 smaller ones. These are the 3 smaller pyramids for each of the wives. They are done in the step pyramid fashion. 2 of them are. One of them is done in a true pyramid. Again, you make it easier on yourself. Okay, not as important.
Are those Cairo? Are those skyscrapers or just normal houses?
Oh, there's skyscrapers. It's a big city.
Those things are massive.
You can see another example of it. So it's very close to the city.
Also, those pyramids are massive.
Yeah, they're real big, real big.
These are huge.
Okay.
They're little ones.
Sit down.
This side of this whole
Tiny.
Yeah. So you have 1,
Wait,
2,
these
3,
are the crazy-
and then 3 over there.
Wait, so why did he need 3?
These are for 3 different pharaohs.
Oh.
That is hilarious.
Yeah,
Yeah, then their water
Is the one in the middle of the
I'm not sure which one is the largest. I don't
Is that one
know.
the most famous? Is there one that's more famous than the other?
Well, the one that is in the best condition is called the Pyramid of Cheops. So there's 3 complexes: the Great Pyramid, built by King Khufu. The smaller one of the Pyramid of Khafre, and then the smaller one of Menkaure. Okay, so there's 3. All right, so let's look at
Best condition.
this one. This is called the Pyramid of Cheops. So let's look at a quick video of it.
The Great Pyramid of Giza, also called the Pyramid of Cheops, is the oldest and largest of the 3 pyramids of the Giza necropolis. It is the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the only one to remain largely intact. Last time, we visited the even older Step Pyramid at Saqqara, 19 miles away, and explored its unique labyrinth of underground tunnels.
There are miles of tunnels like this one. They were built under the pyramids as passageways so that the spirit of the pharaoh could escape and move to the underworld.
This time, we'll see normally closed chambers and passages of Egypt's most
So those
famous
were those
monument
air vents
of
that we
all.
saw. That was for the spirit.
The Great Pyramids of Giza don't have, or at least nobody's found, an underground labyrinth of tunnels. But they do have, inside the pyramids itself, hidden chambers and passageways. They're normally closed to the public, but today we're going to get to see them.
Shortly after taking the throne in 2589 BC, at the age of 20, the pharaoh Cheops commanded his workers to prepare his burial place, the biggest one in history. In keeping with his status as a god and a king, he wanted his pyramid to be far grander than anything that had been built before or since.
This is the main way in, but once you get inside, that's when it starts to get interesting. This is the normal entrance, but if you take a left and you go down these stairs, there is a shaft that goes about 100 yards below the ground.
But trying to find the pharaoh's sarcophagus is sort of like being on a wild goose chase. The pharaoh wasn't sure where he wanted to put it.
At least there's light down here. I can only imagine what it was like to build this thing.
Cheops was the first pharaoh to build a pyramid at Giza. The entire project took 23 years to complete. About 2.5 million building blocks pieced this enormous structure together. At the bottom of this shaft is where the pharaoh first wanted to be laid to rest.
Cheops was an indecisive pharaoh. He didn't know exactly where he wanted his burial chamber to be put. So his architects kept carving shaft after shaft like this one, and then after they'd make it, the pharaoh would decide, no, he wanted it somewhere else. So they'd have to dig a new shaft.
And making matters worse, he wanted another chamber for his queen. This passage goes down through the pyramid and then connects to yet another corridor. Getting to the chamber where Cheops finally decided he wanted to be buried is somewhat exhausting. Certainly not for the claustrophobic, but more than worth it. This staircase leads to the 26-foot-high Grand Gallery. No one would have seen this pitch ceiling. The art and design were for no one but the pharaoh, and for him after he died. Once sealed off, the passageways were protected, at least in theory from thieves, by sliding granite blocks.
And this is finally it, the entrance to the main chamber in the Great Pyramid. This was actually a big lock going into the room. There would have been huge stone slabs here preventing it. You could see some of the hinges where the stones would have been stopped. It didn't work, and this pyramid, like all the ancient tombs except for one, was looted.
King Tutankhamun. We'll talk about him later.
Here it is, the burial chamber, the last burial chamber of the pharaoh. And all of this work, the pyramid, the building, revolved around a relatively small stone box, the pharaoh's sarcophagus. And you can see this too was looted. It was broken into here. And the way tomb robbers generally worked is they would put fire on the rock, and then water, and then fire, and the heat and contractions would chip the stone, and then once there was cracks in it, they would pull it away and take the mummy out. These are one of the most interesting features of the burial chambers. They're technically called air shafts, but they weren't so much designed to allow air to come in as to allow the spirit of the pharaoh to escape and go on to the next world. And they are very deep. They just keep going and going. The pharaohs clearly wanted to be surrounded by tons of stone, but also to make sure they had a way so their soul could get out.
Toward the end of my tour, I was left feeling awe.
Okay. Question. Rachel.
Did no one, like, I don't understand, because are they not respecting the Egyptian traditions? Because don't they believe that, like, taking the treasure from the one that wasn't looted and, like, putting it into a museum, isn't it part of, like, Egyptian tradition that they need that in the afterlife?
Not so much anymore. There are not many people today who still believe in the same religious, still have the same religious practices as the pharaohs. That's kind of a dead religion. People in Egypt now are either Muslim or nothing, or there's about 10% that are Christian. So that's the religious practice of Egypt today.
What stopped people from running?
It was
When
hidden.
did they find it?
How?
When?
They didn't find the pyramid.
1900s, early 1900s.
They didn't find the pyramid or the tomb?
The tomb. The tomb. We'll talk about that when we get to the Middle Kingdom, because he was in the Middle Kingdom.
So which pyramid was called the Pyramid of Cheops?
Cheops, that's the main one that we're looking at. So it's the Pyramid of Giza, also known as Pyramid of Cheops. That's the main one.
But aren't they all considered the pyramids of Giza?
The Pyramids of Giza, yeah. But the Pyramid of Cheops, that's the main one that we're looking at.
Okay, so that was the one from
Mhm.
Khufu?
Mm-hmm. All right, so how did they build these? How'd they do it? You saw how big those stones were, right? Each stone was, probably about this big. The answer is I kind of jokingly said last time, you have enough slaves, you can build anything, right? And so this is the pyramid behind, and they would just be dragging these stones up these massive ramps using sleds with round sticks underneath it. That's our best guess as to how they were building these. Each stone, so the stone was going to be brought, and this is all very near the Nile. All the pyramids that we see are near some sort of a waterway, whether it was near the Nile or another little tributary, or if there's not a river there now, there was. We can tell from archaeology that there was a river there. Or they would build canals. They would just build canals off the Nile, and they'd be able to float these stones using barges into the place where they need them real close, and then they would cut them into these precise measurements, mark them, and then put them up. That's our best guess as to how they did it, without any cranes or anything like that. They very precise measurements. Another theory is maybe they floated the stones. Maybe they put like animal skin bladders on and floated them up. That's a theory. It's not as, probably not, but it's a theory. Again, we just don't know.
Didn't they keep record of everything? So do we not have this record, or?
They considered this as like manual labor. So why would you keep a record of what the slaves are doing? They kept a record of the plans, but not how they did it.
Wait, so that would be water, and what was in that thing?
So these are the stones, and then they would just tie like these air bladders to them and just float them up. It's less likely that they did it this way. It's probably more just brute force. They had thousands and thousands and thousands of slaves. And over the course of 26 years, you can build something that big.
Where do they get their slaves from? Just from Egypt? Or?
From Egypt, from conquering other peoples, Assyria, the Jews, etc. Just anyone that they captured, they would be put to work.
How long did the pyramid take?
The one that we were looking at, the Pyramid of Cheops, that took 26 years. And it was...
That seems like a long time, but it's not.
It's not that long when you think about it, but you've got thousands and thousands of people working on it, basically around the clock, sun up to sundown, every day. That's how you're getting it done. And again, kind of like what we talked about with Stonehenge, if you have enough conviction that this is something that is important for you, for your religious practice, you're going to get it done, right? We see that with ourselves. If there's something that's important, we're going to get it done.
What if you died before your pyramid was finished?
I don't know. I was just thinking that. That's a good question. I'm not sure. Maybe it would be put in and then they would finish working. I don't know.
So would they start the pyramid right away once you were emperor?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. There's another work of art that's right nearby. It's called the Great Sphinx. We don't know exactly who who the Sphinx is or what the Sphinx is. So we know that the Sphinx is again, mythological creature. It was seen as a god. A Sphinx is basically has the body of a lion with the head of a man. We think that the head was actually is actually depicting one of the two pharaohs in the Great Pyramid as well. So it's either Khufu or Khafre, one of those two. So it's either Khufu or his son Khafre. Again, these are guesses. We're not 100% sure. But also, right around the pyramids in recent years, they've discovered that there were cemeteries, a workers' village, a whole industrial complex. Like, if you think about it, this is a huge work site. You need to support what's going on here. And then there's this sculpture called the Great Sphinx. So it's a limestone statue of a reclining sphinx, again, a lion's body and a human head. It is the largest monolith statue in the world, meaning standing by itself. It is the largest monolith statue in the world.
That's not it, or is it the...
That's a depiction of it. This is it. 241 feet long, 63 feet wide, and 66 feet tall.
What's monolith mean?
Monolith meaning it's standing by itself. So Mount Rushmore would be a larger statue, or Crazy Horse would be a larger statue, but it's on the edge, it's carved into rock. It's not standing by itself, right? It's not standing by itself with a base and completely empty around it. So that's what it's called, a monolith.
Wait, what were you comparing it to?
Like Crazy Horse or Mount Rushmore. Those would be bigger, but they're carved into rock, and then you have the whole mountain behind it. So that's not considered a monolith.
So what is necropolis?
Necropolis is it's a Greek word for a burial ground. So a necropolis is like a burial chamber. So a pyramid, no, the Sphinx is just a statue.
Oh.
A necropolis is a burial tomb. So when we talk about a necropolis, we're referring to a pyramid or we're referring to another tomb. Technically, every gravesite is its own necropolis. That's just a Greek word for this burial chamber, these burial chambers. All right, we're going to skip through some of this.
He ordered his people to build these two huge mud brick walls to protect the Sphinx from sand.
It's huge.
Opposite the Sphinx's left haunch and above the Sphinx ditch are remnants of a mud brick wall. Some of its bricks are stamped with the name of Thutmose. Originally coated in plaster, the wall stood nearly 30 feet tall. And to restore the Sphinx's weathered body, Thutmose placed large blocks of stone on its paws.
Look at this stone. That is a big stone that were added in the
See how tall it is.
And this stela also reveals a clue to what the Sphinx meant to New Kingdom Egyptians.
So this was done in the Old Kingdom. A pharaoh in the New Kingdom restored it.
The kings wanted to record something that they wanted to last forever. They would write in stone, and they would write on very large stela, such as this one, in hieroglyphs.
Kasia Spakowska translates two key hieroglyphs.
You can see there's something that looks like a bird there. That's actually the sign of the falcon. That's the name Horus.
Horus, depicted as a falcon, is one of the oldest and most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon. Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was Horus incarnate.
And just below is the Akhet, the horizon, with the two mountains on the side and the sun disk in between.
When the falcon and Akhet hieroglyphs are combined, they form Horus on the horizon, the name of an Egyptian god who guards the entrance to the afterlife. This is the identity of the Sphinx in the New Kingdom. To ancient Egyptians, the horizon was the entrance to the afterlife. Just as the sun sets over the horizon and rises the next day, they too believed they could be reborn. As the guardian to the afterlife, the Sphinx was crucial to that process.
So this is why it was built there. He's the guardian of the afterlife for these
clearing
tombs.
away the sands was not just saving the Sphinx, he was saving a god.
Someone buried in him.
And he does
He's
more.
like a guardian statue for the tombs.
Close inspection of the face of the Sphinx reveals traces of blue paint still clinging to its ear. The evidence suggests Thutmose gives the Sphinx a new kingdom monumental makeover.
We're used to seeing the Sphinx as this beige-colored monument out in the desert. But when it was in its heyday, reborn in the new kingdom, it was a very brightly painted image, painted in comic book colors. The face was probably red.
That was the New Kingdom pharaoh.
Yellow and blue. And this painting of the Sphinx was something that for the Egyptians probably brought it to life.
The Great Sphinx, revered as a god, guarding the entrance to the afterlife.
Okay, so that's the purpose of it. That's why it's there. We see again this same concept of a new pharaoh in the new kingdom, so 2 whole kingdoms ahead in the new kingdom, again, trying to correlate himself with the god of the old kingdom, right? The previous pharaoh. They're always trying to make that connection between I'm the same guy. You should follow me the same way you follow him. He's a god, I will be a god. Same sort of thing. Okay? Mm-hmm.
I think I know like something called the Great Sphinx.
It depends. It depends on sometimes they will. They'll definitely try to restore some of it. But that's kind of a huge debate, and we'll talk about that as we go through art history. Do you restore things to the way they were, or do you keep them? You know, we don't know. We'll talk just briefly about mummification. Again, remember the mummification was part of this idea of keeping the body alive, or keeping the body in as good condition as possible for its trip to the afterlife. Remember also that Osiris was mummified himself. The god was mummified. His body was spread all around. His wife came and put it all back together. So there's, again, this correlation between this is what the god did, this is what we do. You've probably all heard about mummification. They remove the internal organs. They wrap the body in linen. And the deceased would continue his ritual life.
What do they do with organs and stuff?
The organs would be placed in its own little box and buried right next to him, or put right next to him.
Why did they separate the body?
To preserve the body as best as possible. So same thing that we do for embalming today. A lot of the organs are taken out, the blood is drained, and the body's pumped with formaldehyde. Same sort of thing. Okay. The soul of the deceased. So they were preserving the body and the soul by mummifying the body. Many mummies were provided with some form of funerary literature, spells, and instructions for navigating the afterlife. Only the pharaoh and the priests who wrote it had access to these texts. Remember, only the higher-ranking people were able to write in hieroglyphics. So this was called the Book of the Dead, or the Book of Spells. Yeah.
Are there still like real mummies in the museum, or did they?
Yeah, there still are. Yeah. I saw Ramses II, so the same one who was, let my people go, Moses. Yeah. Yeah. You see him in a museum. That's him. He's there. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Where did I see this one? New York, I think. But I think it was on a traveling exhibit. I think he's back in Cairo now. I think. What's that?
When they transport them, like that would be kind of scary.
Yeah.
Something goes wrong.
The spells and stuff they put on those?
Yeah, I know it. Okay, so let's look at sculptures and carvings of the Old Kingdom. So they were perfecting the art of sculpting and carving intricate relief decoration out of stone. So this is called, again, relief decoration. We'll talk about relief more. But relief decoration is basically carving into a block of stone, and it's not separated. So you still have, the carving is still attached. They're creating the first life-size statues and fine reliefs in stone and copper and wood as well. By the 4th dynasty, still in the Old Kingdom, we have this idea of the Ka statue. So Ka, K-A, the Ka statue. The Ka is you can sort of equivocate it to what we would call the soul, right? It was a little bit more than that for the Egyptians, but basically it's the soul, it's the life force of the pharaoh. These statues were placed in tombs as a resting place for the Ka, or the spirit of the person after death, which either I don't know enough about Egyptian mythology and religion, or I'm missing something, because the spirit was supposed to go into the afterlife, but then there's also these statues called the Ka statues where the spirit would reside. I don't know enough about that, so I must be missing something. But regardless, these are what's called the Ka statues, and these were placed inside the tomb, again, where the spirit could reside. Maybe it was just for a time before they went to the afterlife. I don't know. But they were life-size, and they tried to make them as close to what the pharaoh actually looked like as possible. Dressed in all these funerary garments and, you know, wearing the headdress. We'll talk about the beard thing a little bit later.
I don't know if you know, but what would be the point of that, of residing in it, of sitting in it?
I'm not sure. I don't know. Sorry. The fourth dynasty, we also have what's called reserve heads. These are plain, hairless, natural busts. These were found mostly in non-royal tombs. Here we have the Ka that looks very similar to the pharaoh, and he's dressed in all this stuff, and he's life-size. People of lesser importance didn't have enough money or didn't have, you know, the wherewithal to hire people to do it. They still had the same beliefs, and they still wanted to get to the afterlife themselves, so they would just be buried with a head that looked like them. So this was where their Ka could reside. Not as fancy as what the pharaohs had, but it's still there. So that's called the reserve heads. Each head has a striking individuality, leading to the argument that, yes, these are portraits. Even though the nose is broken off, you can tell that these look a little bit different from each other. There are some depictions of deity figures, so depictions of the gods. Not as many of those are found in the Old Kingdom, probably because, as we'll see in many other cultures, they didn't want to depict the gods. Maybe they felt like they couldn't or shouldn't. Again, we don't know, but we don't find from the Old Kingdom a lot of depictions of the gods. We see them in walls of tombs, certainly, but we don't see any statues or anything like that. Maybe they didn't think about doing it, or maybe there was this kind of prohibition against doing it. Many scholars think the latter, that was why. And we can see throughout time that the appearance of these statues are changing very, very little. Okay, so that's the Old Kingdom. So the Old Kingdom, we have the pyramids, mastabas, step pyramids, and then the Sphinx, and then we have this process, the kind of this idea of mummification and these burial techniques that really got solidified during this period.
Did they keep the middle, I mean the ancient middle and then the new kingdom? Did they all do like pyramids for their?
No, that's just the old kingdom. We'll see what they did.
So only the Old Kingdom were pyramids.
There are some other pyramids that were done, but this was the age of the pyramids.
Okay.
And we'll see what they did next time.
What happened to so if the pharaoh would be buried inside the pyramid, would his wife get a pyramid to herself, or would she share it with him?
Oftentimes she would have her own. Sometimes she'd be buried with him, but usually not, because you want to get him in and you want to get it sealed off as soon as possible so that he can then do his journey to the afterlife. So if his wife died at the same time, maybe sometimes it was done where workers would dig in and put her next to him, but that takes a lot of work, and she's just not that important, right? So they would do this own separate tomb. Sometimes maybe she died a little bit earlier, and so they would just store her, and then they would bury them both. It just depends. But oftentimes not. That did happen a couple times, but that wasn't a normal practice. That wasn't as normal.
Why would they do it a couple times? What was the reason for that?
The pharaoh wanted it.
The pharaoh wanted it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, a lot of these, remember, a lot of the pharaohs and his wives throughout history were related. And so maybe the pharaoh's son who's going to be taking over saw his mother as a threat. So he may have had her killed too. That did happen at times. Again, not all the time, but you know, we're talking about a long period of time. This is 4,000 years. So you think about anything that could have happened, it probably happened.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the Egyptians. Is it them that, like, when the pharaoh dies, sometimes the pharaoh's wife would commit suicide so that she could be with him?
Sometimes. Some cultures did this. Sometimes the Egyptians would do it. But that, again, that's not a real standard practice.
How long did the early kingdom last?
2600 to 2150 BC.
So why were these figures called Ka?
So Ka is the name for the spirit. So these were called Ka figures or spirit figures, where the spirit of...
Sorry, what happened to the normal day people? How were they buried?
Tombs,
Like
they're normal.
We have today?
Huh?
Kind of thing? Like underground tombs that we have today? Okay.
Mm-hmm. And they'd be buried, you know, just wrapped in linen. They wouldn't be as mummified, but they would try to preserve the body as best they could, wrap them in linen, bury them, and then some of the things would be put around them, and then put them in the dirt.
Would they still be able to travel to the afterlife?
Mm-hmm.
Have we found any normal day people tombs?
Yeah.
Or
Yep.
we have, okay.
Yeah, there's lots of tombs of like the workers right around the pyramid of Giza. Again, there was lots of accidents. Lots of people died during that production. So there was a cemetery for that right nearby. Found that. Yep. Yep. But I mean, it's similar to what we have today, right? A tomb of a president is going to be much more fancy and you know, interesting than your tomb and my tomb. That's fairly normal. All right, we don't have time to do a review. What I'm going to do is I'll just do a quick study guide, and I'll give it to you guys tomorrow for the test. Okay? You betcha.